So the next step after the prep phase. In the prep phase, just as a recap, we hit them with, or hit our armor pieces with 60 grit sandpaper. Then we went in with Bondo spot glaze. Alternately, you can use things like plastic metal or other spot glazes. You can find these in most places in the automotive section at department stores. But we hit it with spot glaze and coated it all over. And then we needed to sand down that spot glaze. I used 100 grit to sand down the spot glaze so that it became smooth. Now at 100 grit, there's still going to be all kinds of scores in it, which is why I was recommending going the opposite direction of the grain from your 3D print. Right, after that, we're going to use automotive filler. Now, automotive filler primer, you can use regular printer's filler primer. It's a little bit thicker. The automotive is a little bit thinner. I like it because it's easier to work with. The painting stuff tends to come out in clumps sometimes, especially if the can gets cold. But basically, it's a gray or black sandable surface that sets the stage for being able to put the paint on it. So you hit it with that gray primer, let it dry, then sand that. For sanding the primer, I usually use about 220 grit, something in that neighborhood, so a much finer grit. You sand the primer until you can just start to see some of the areas of Bondo through it. If you want, at that point, you can prime it again, but you don't necessarily have to. All right, the next stage after that, now we've got, or we should have, a pretty flat, smooth surface to work with. Except in those areas where we've made it not so. So the stage after that, what I do is I go in with a satin black. Now you can see some drips in here, that's unimportant. I'm going to be covering this with a few other things. But the satin black is the first layer of our base coat. All right, the only reason for the satin black is satin, because it is that sort of shiny finish, it actually fills in some of the remaining holes or grooves that might be there, helps remove some imperfections, but it also makes a really good surface for adding metallic print or paint on top of. If you just put metallic paint on top of the primer, it comes out as sort of a dull metallic. If you put a satin black coat down first, then you put the metallic paint on, then it really sort of pops and becomes very shiny. So put a satin black layer on. You could use a semi-gloss black layer, that would be fine too. And following that, I put my base layer of metallic. Now this is just rattle can primer included silver spray paint. All right, you see here some of those dents that I put in there. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm basically putting down the silver layer, and the silver is going to be my base coat. It's the top layer of my base coat. I'm going to start masking now and putting on top coats, and this is going to be the lowest visible layer of material. Okay, I do that because ideally the armor is supposed to be made of Beskar. So if you get through all of the junk and the grime and the paint and all the dings, what you should have underneath that is a shiny silver layer. So this is my top level of my base coat. That's going to be the lowest exposed level. Okay, from here, I'm going to mask this out. In the places where I'm going to have chipped colored paint, I'm going to put that paint right on top of this and then chip it up so that you can see the shiny metallic through that chipped paint. In the other areas, I'm going to be using this as a base coat, and I'm going to be putting a hammer tone on top of it. My thought process behind this is that where the metal has been exposed, it's picked up not necessarily corrosion, but just debris. Where it's been painted, it's stayed a little bit cleaner underneath that paint. So any layer that I'm going to paint with a colored paint that's supposed to actually look like paint, I'm going to put that paint right on top of this and then peel it down to expose this base layer. Anywhere where I'm going to have exposed metal, you're not going to see this layer. So what I do to start is I'm going to mask out those areas where that paint color is going to be, and I'm going to put that hammer tone on the exposed metal areas first. right, so starting off here with this, and you can see that terrible gap here where I ran out of filament. Again, with a lot of work, it's not there. I covered some of it with these dents or blemishes. You can kind of see it at the bottom of this dent. I'm going to fill that in enough, it's not going to be a problem. But with this many layers on it so far, we've obscured most of the material, obscured most of the unintentional damage, and we're highlighting the intentional damage. So now we're looking at top coats, and then we're going to be looking at final weather.